We're in Chapter 6, Learning. These slides tell you an overall picture of learning and memory. In Chapter 4, we talk about the sensory system. You have 5 senses. Their job is to transfer the outside environment in physical stimulus into the language your brain is speaking. There's the neurotransmitter release and action potential. And all this information go to your brain, they go to the sensory buffer. And apparently not all of them gonna go to your memory because you do forget a lot of things in this part. And if your brain decides they're important enough to become your memory, they will go into your learning and memory system, including short-term memory. And this short-term memory will become the working memory. Working memory is more like a stage. Okay, anything the spotlight shine on is called the working memory. So on the stage, all of them will stay in the short-term memory, and your spotlight say, okay, now it's the actor's turn. It will shine the light to the actor. It becomes your working memory, and your brain choose it. It will go through this process called consolidation. Consolidation, it will turn into the long-term memory. And every time you want to remember something, you retrieve those long-term memory. And they don't stay there forever, because apparently we do forget things. They can disappear, or they can stay there forever. It depends on how important these events are. And at molecular level, that's the repetition. Repetition will cause the synapse between neuron and neuron stay there forever, and it will store the long-term memory. So start from your attention. Your attention will choose what's the important stuff. So a lot of stuff goes into your sensory system. They won't even go into here because your brain is busy. This is expensive. So you need to choose important information, turn them into the memory. So your attention will choose it. And it will turn through the learning process and eventually become your memory. So today we will focus on this part. So you focus, you acquire knowledge, eventually you store those knowledge. Okay, and let's look at the methodology. In learning, the methodology is, those scientists is called behaviorists because they use a lot of animals. They care about the animals' behavior change, and their behavior change is learning. The most famous behaviorist is this person, Pavlov. Do you know he received Nobel Prize? I told you in the previous lecture. He received Nobel Prize. He's a physiologist. But his Nobel Prize study is not this. It's not conditioning. He received Nobel Prize when he studied the digestive system. So he's a physiologist, really focused on the digestive system. And that's actually his dog. He's a pretty busy person, so he always works on his desk. And every time he wants to feed his dog, he will take a bell, he ring a bell. And he tries to attract the dog's attention. And then he will give the dog food. And after doing it for a while, for a few weeks, a few months, and I told you a good scientist always pay attention to the detail, like the Piaget's, right? He pay attention to when he worked in the testing center. He found students in the same grade tend to make the same mistake. Okay, now Pavlov, he found every time he ring the bell, and his dog, that's his dog, start to produce saliva. And he said, what's going on? Because the bell could be anything, right? Bell is a neutral stimulus. Apparently, something happened in the dog's brain. In the dog's brain, the dog paired the sound with the food. And that's classical conditioning. Classical conditioning, you have those unconditioned reflex, like food with salivation, produce saliva. And the food, well, you don't need to train the dog. The food is good. Then when you get hungry, well, you can eat. So the food is unconditioned stimulus. And producing saliva, that's the natural response. That's unconditioned response. So US, you are. This one don't require learning. However, the bell, the sound, is the neutral stimulus. It could mean anything. But in the dog's brain, the dog associate the sound with producing saliva. So it will associate the conditioned require learning, so conditioned stimulus, and become the conditioned response. In this experiment, it just turned out the conditioned response is the same as the unconditional one, it's produce saliva. And that's the classical conditioning. And after that, Pavlov became very famous, and a lot of psychologists do the classical conditioning experiment. You pair one thing with another. And that's about a century ago. So you can do some experiment in baby. Not now. Nowadays it's unethical. So this person, Watson, actually do the conditioning experiment to this little baby. And he make the baby be afraid of rat. So the baby used to be very interested in the rat. And if you watch this video, he paired the rat with a loud sound. So now the baby is afraid of living animal. So it's considered non-ethical nowadays, but it can be done a century ago. And classical conditioning affect our life. A lot of things. We go through classical conditioning, even though you are not aware of it. My favorite two examples. First one, money. Think about the first time you see money. You are in the kindergarten and you have first birthday party. The kids comes and they give you a balloon. You feel very happy. They give you candy. Okay, you feel very happy. And then you receive a card. You open the card, it's from your grandparents, and inside they say, "We're so proud of you. You are 5, you're 6, and inside you have a $20 bill." And you look at this piece of paper, you found, well, okay, it's too small to fold it as a airplane, and you throw it away, right? And that's your mom grab it and say, "Finally, I got something useful." Okay? But now if I ask you, you're adult, you want the money or you want the candy? Of course you want this. Because in the past 15 years, you learned this is actually a neutral stimulus. But you can use this to exchange with something you really want. And suddenly this becomes very powerful, a conditioned stimulus. And it becomes so powerful, and a lot of people, they just work so hard to get this, and they forget this is actually a conditioned stimulus. It's not the money matter, it's what you can exchange with money matter. And sometimes some things you really could not exchange with money. And people got lost in this because this is so powerful. Okay, next example. You got the A in your transcript. This is actually a conditioned stimulus. Who cares about A? Your favorite letter, think about you are in kindergarten. Your favorite letter is not A, your favorite letter is F. Especially it's written in cursive, it looks so cool, right? And now you don't want to have F on your transcript. Is you got the A, you go home and your mom look at this, say, "Oh great, wonderful job, let's go out and celebrate." Now you associate this with all this reward, classical conditioning. And in your whole school year, you work so hard to get this A on your transcript because you learned, okay, this equals to respect, equal to your great future when you apply for nursing school, for future job, for your transcript. This is very powerful, and this is classical conditioning. So this happens in our life a lot. It affects our life a lot. Let's look at interesting example. I don't have to explain too much. Have you wondered why in those fancy sports cars there are always those pretty women stand next to them? Classical conditioning. Because it makes you think if you get this, you get this. Classical conditioning. So it affects our life all the time. and it's a very powerful tool. So just one example teach you, okay, do you understand what's the conditioned stimulus, what's unconditioned? Ice cream, what do you think? Unconditioned, right? Because, well, there's a food. And the bells of the ice cream sound, you hear it, you know ice cream is coming. Yes, this is the conditioned stimulus. So we have the conditioned stimulus, we have the unconditioned stimulus. And this is the video. If you are interested, you can look at this. This college kid, he trained classical conditioned his roommate by using the air gun and associate with the sound. So eventually his roommate responds to the sound. Pretty interesting. If you are interested, you can take a look. And the process, it takes a while because you want to train your brain associate a neutral stimulus with a reward or with a punishment. So this process takes a while. You need to repeat a few times. And this process is called acquisition. And after you established the conditioning and you provide the stimulus, if you don't provide the results, eventually the association will disappear. It's called extinction. So you can have acquisition to build a new classical conditioning. You can have extinction to dissociate them. And let's look at one example. Okay, sometimes you have the parents complain, every time I take the kids to the HEB and they will stand in front of the candy areas and will cry and cry until I buy them candy. And, well, first, whose fault is it? Parents' fault. Because the kids established the conditioning. They know, okay, my bad behavior embarrassed the parents, eventually associate with the reward. So how do you really break this? Let's go back to this, right? Because they have the acquisition. They found, oh, okay, every time I embarrass my parents and I got my reward, and they will do it more and more frequently. And you need to do is extinction. So you need to break the association. Eventually they learned, okay, well, it won't work, and they won't do it. Now let's go to the other one. So Thorndike is another famous psychologist. He talked about operant conditioning. And you found when I start to explain it, it's a little bit similar to the classical conditioning. Psychologists have ego. So they want to use their own way to explain the events. And they will say, okay, I don't like this way, I will use my word to explain it. And that's why you found there are a lot of similarities in this different kind of conditioning. But they tend to focus on different parts. So let's look at the Thorndike's experiment, operant conditioning. He focused on the behavior and the learning curve. He used the cat. So he put the cat into the cage, and the cat won't be happy. It will struggle, it will push this, push that, and accidentally he pushed this bar. And when the cat pushed the bar, the door opens so the cat can get out. And he measured the time he put the cat into the cage until the cat get out. So that's the time. And the second time, he put the cat back, and the cat struggle. Okay, eventually he opened the bar and move out. That's the time. So each time point. And you found after 2 weeks, you put the cat into the cage, and the cat just pull the bar and open and get out. That's why the time become shorter and shorter. And that's the operant conditioning. You have a learning curve. And you found this applied to a lot of pretty much every learning things in your daily life. You learn how to ride a bicycle, you learn how to swim, you learn how to take a test. All of them, you have those learning curve. And that's the operant conditioning. So in the Thorndike's theory, operant conditioning, their subject's behavior change, their behavior affect the outcome. And there's the process called operant or instrumental conditioning. And why they need to do it? They call it reinforcement. So in that experiment, getting out of the cage is the reinforcement. And you have the primary and secondary reinforcement. So the food will be the primary one, and the secondary one will be the one require learning, like the money, and you got a good grade. As I said, there are a lot of similarities in different theories, but in operant conditioning, this is called the reinforcer. Let's take a break.